With a population of 1.4 million, Calgary is the 5th largest metro in Canada, and it has grown far past expectations. You see, the first European recorded in the area only happened in 1787. Now, this is the second Alberta city that we cover on this channel, and if you've seen my video on Edmonton, I'd first like to say that I forgot to add, it's the northernmost city in North America, not in the world. Secondly, make sure you're subscribed, and let's get right into Calgary's rocky rise. Now, the Calgary area has been inhabited by multiple First Nations since at least 11,000 years ago, but it wasn't until 1787 that David Thompson, then 17 years old, spent the winter with a band of Piikani Nation along the Bow River. But there was only one little issue. You see, this young 17-year-old worked for the Hudson's Bay Company as a land surveyor. Therefore, he never really settled in Calgary. We would have to wait until 1873 for the first European settler, named John Glenn, to settle in the area. A decade or so later, in 1881, the federal government started giving out leases for land in the area for ranching, which would be the first major catalyst for immigration. They were giving up to 100,000 acres, and only 2 years later, the Canadian Pacific Railway would reach the area. Now, not only did people have an economic reason to visit Calgary, but with the arrival of the train, it would be easier than ever. Furthermore, the Canadian Pacific Railway began selling lots around the station, which I imagine would have been ideal for markets. However, in 1884 and 1885, well, these were not the best years for the city. You see, one of the councillors threatened an undercover RCMP officer, which resulted in his arrest, and this started a snowball effect in which fines were given out to journalists who criticized the judge, who then arrested that journalist, and this whole snowball effect ended with the town pretty much not having a functioning government. And this was one of the reasons why in 1886 a fire completely destroyed Calgary's downtown, because no one was capable of running the government. Although 14 buildings were destroyed, no one was injured. The question of provincehood was on everyone's mind in Calgary at the turn of the century. Alberta was proclaimed a province on September 1st, 1905, with Edmonton as the provisional capital. You see, the legislature would have to choose the permanent location. There were many supporters that actually did want Calgary to be chosen. However, in a 16-8 vote, Edmonton kept the title. Not giving up on being a major city in the new province, Calgary threw their hat in the ring to have the provincial university built there. But once again, they were defeated, and the University of Alberta was built in the city of Strathcona, which would later be merged with Edmonton. Now, the 20th century would be a productive one for Calgary, with built-up areas being serviced by power and water between 1905 and 1912. In 1909, actually, a 7-mile track of municipally owned street railway system opened in Calgary. And with 250,000 passengers per month recorded by 1910, I think this was a success. The period of 1906 and 1911 would actually be the largest population growth period in the city's history, from 12,000 inhabitants to 43 inhabitants in the 5-year period. And now, I told you this period would be productive. In 1908, we would see one of the biggest attractions in Calgary open up, the annual Stampede, which gathered over 100,000 people during the 6-day debut event, which was a huge success. Now, zooming through, we end up to the 1970s, where we would see a more vulnerable Calgary. You see, the 70s and the 80s were a period of economic boom and bust. Beginning with the 1970s energy crisis, Calgary became a center of significant investment and growth. Its population increased from 330,000 to 636,000 over a 20-year period, from 1966 to 1986. High-rise buildings would be erected during this economic boom, with more office space being opened in Calgary in 1979 than in New York and Chicago combined. However, following the implementation of the National Energy Program in 1984 and a drop in world oil prices, this marked the end of Calgary's boom. You see, the drop in oil prices hurt so bad that the city cut services to ease a $16 million deficit, and 421 employees were laid off. Population would decrease for its first time in history during a 12-month period, and 300,000 homes would be foreclosed. The low prices were so bad that it would take until the 1990s for an economic recovery. However, Calgary didn't seem worried in the slightest, with them securing $270 million in funding and being selected to host the 1988 Winter Olympic Games, being the first Winter Games host in Canada. Calgary not only had big money funding, but they also decided to build the Games arena from scratch, with the Canada Olympic Park alone costing $200 million. This big gamble, however, seemed to pay off, with the city experiencing a major economic boom, and studies estimating it generated $1.4 billion across Canada, with 70% of that being in Alberta alone. If we look at present-day Calgary, oil and gas is still an important part. However, tourism and high-tech is also becoming significant industries, with over 3.1 million people now visiting the city annually. Now, before ending off the video, did you know Calgary also has one of the first light rail systems in North America? Their C-Train system carries approximately half of Calgary downtown workers. Now, if you'd like to see a video on this busy system, make sure to let me know in the comments down below. Also, with a population of over 1 million people, Edmonton is Canada's 5th largest city, behind Ottawa. However, it is the most northern city with a population of over 1 million people. Take a look at this map. Now, of course, this is Canada, but as you can see, these are the cities with populations exceeding 1 million people. Edmonton is by far the most northern, but have you ever wondered why and how it grew to become one of Canada's largest cities? Make sure you've subscribed, and let's dive into Edmonton's rapid rise. Now, Edmonton's European history begins here. The Northwest Company traders established Fort Augustus north of Edmonton in 1795. A year later, the Hudson's Bay Company, a rival to the Northwest Company in the North American fur trade, built Edmonton House, which was later named Fort Edmonton, beside the Fort Augustus. However, Edmonton's settlement would only begin in the 1870s, with pioneer farmers living in rustic log cabins along the river. These farms served as the foundation for the 1882 survey of the land into river lots. 1885 Street and Fort Edmonton Park represent Edmonton's early hamlet. Edmonton was incorporated as a town in 1894. The town included the McLaughlin and modern Boyle Street, which was the original downtown. With the arrival of the Canadian Pacific Railway across the river in nearby South Edmonton in 1891, which was incorporated in 1899 as Strathcona, and the federal government's successful campaign to lure settlers to Canada's west later that decade, Edmonton began to prosper as an agriculture distribution and processing center. The long-awaited arrival of the Canadian Northern Railway, which became part of the Canadian National Railways in 1919, coincided with the establishment of Alberta as a province and the designation of Edmonton as its capital in 1906. These events aided Edmonton's growth and development and integration with a number of nearby towns, beginning with Strathcona in 1912, significantly increasing Edmonton's area and population. The real estate boom abruptly ended, though, just prior to World War I, causing the city's population to plummet from over 72,500 in 1914 to under 54,000 only 2 years later. During the war, the high rate of volunteer enlistment in the army contributed to the population decline. During the 1920s and 1930s, the city's population and economy grew slowly before taking off during and after World War II. During World War II, Edmonton served as a staging area for military operations, as well as the construction of the Alaska Highway, Blatchford Field, later Edmonton City Center Airport, and it was a Royal Canadian Air Force base in Edmonton, and it played an important military role that lasted throughout the Cold War. During World War II, the United States military used the field as its base of operations for Alaska defense, but after outgrowing that facility, it built another one north of the city. On February 13th, 1947, the first major oil discovery in Alberta was made near the town of Leduc, south of Edmonton. Oil reserves were discovered in the southern part of Alberta as early as 1914, but they produced very little oil in comparison to those around Edmonton. Additional oil reserves were discovered near the town of Redwater in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Because of the majority of Alberta's oil reserves were concentrated in central and northern Alberta, Edmonton became the center of the oil industry in the province. The subsequent oil boom established Edmonton as the oil capital of Canada. and the city's population increased from 149,000 to 269,000 during the 1950s. Following a relatively calm but still prosperous period in the 1960s, the city's growth accelerated in tandem with high global oil prices caused by the 1973 oil crisis and the 1979 Iranian Revolution. The oil boom of the 1970s and 1980s came to an abrupt end with a sharp drop in international oil prices and the implementation of the National Energy Program in 1981. Now, from 1980 to 1985, the Canadian federal government's energy policy was known as a National Energy Program. The economically national policy sought to ensure Canadian energy independence, but it was strongly opposed by the private sector and the oil-producing Western Canadian provinces, particularly Alberta. The NEP was established on October 28, 1980 by Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's Liberal government in response to the two oil crises of the 1970s. Its three main goals were to increase Canadian ownership of the oil industry, price energy fairly for Canadian consumers, and provide Canadian energy self-sufficiency. The NEP was also intended to promote lower prices through price controls, to promote oil exploration in Canada, to promote alternative energy sources, and to increase federal government revenue from oil sales through a variety of taxes and revenue sharing with the Western Canadian provinces. The NEP proved to be a highly contentious policy initiative, eliciting strong opposition and outrage in Western Canada, particularly in Alberta. Peter Lougheed, the province premier, was a vocal opponent of the NEP, claiming that it interfered with provincial jurisdiction and unfairly deprived Alberta of oil revenue. But returning to Edmonton, West Edmonton Mall, the world's largest at the time, opened in 1981. The mall, which is still the largest in North America, is one of Alberta's most popular tourist destinations. In the late 1990s, the cities entered a recent period of economic recovery and prosperity, aided by a strong recovery in oil prices and further economic diversification. While oil production and refining continued to be the foundation of many Edmonton jobs, the city's economy managed to diversify significantly. Downtown Edmonton has seen rapid development in recent years, as it's located on a relatively flat prairie landscape distinguished by the meandering North Saskatchewan River. The river and its tributaries that flow into the city cut steep ravines throughout the urban landscape. And because of the presence of these ravine systems, many miles of linear parks have been built, inviting both summer and winter recreation. The central business district, with its many high-rise office and condominium buildings, is located north of the river. The 28-story Epcor Tower, built in 2011, was the first new office tower in 22 years, and the low-rise steel and glass art gallery of Alberta, built in 2010, are two distinctive structures that transformed the city's skyline in the early 21st century. However, the downtown core's architecture is not entirely modern. The Alberta Legislature Building, built in 1912, is notable for its Beaux Art style. This economic prosperity is attracting a large number of workers from across the country. Between 2016 and 2010, 83,000 new residents were expected to move to Edmonton, more than doubling the rate predicted by city planners. Many of the new workers who have relocated to the city are young men and come to work. The Edmonton metropolitan area surpassed 1 million people in 2008, making it the most northern city in North America with a metropolitan population of more than 1 million. Now, I'll end this story here because, well, Alberta as a whole has slowed down, primarily due to low oil prices. Edmonton, though, is still a beautiful and vibrant city with a diverse population and pretty well-paying job. What if I revealed that Canada boasts the second busiest LRT system in North America, and it's not in Toronto or Montreal, but in the western city of Calgary, Alberta? Yes, you heard it correctly. This bustling LRT system thrives in Canada's fifth largest metropolitan region. So how did Calgary achieve this remarkable feat? Let's dive straight into it. Enter the C-Train, light rail system in Calgary that operates as a high-capacity light metro. In the downtown area, well, the fee is nothing, it's actually free. And it also transformed into a modern tram, gliding along a dedicated right-of-way. This innovative subway surface alignment, often dubbed a semi-metro, might just hold the key to why the system excels in transporting Calgary's citizens. But Before we unravel the big questions, let's delve into the fascinating history of the sea train. The concept of rail transit in Calgary took root in a 1967 transportation study, and it proposed a two-line metro system, which was set to debut in 1978. However, a construction boom in the 1970s led to a shift away from the heavy rail concept due to escalated costs. In its place, light rapid rail transit emerged as the preferred choice over dedicated busways. You see, LRT not only offered a lower long-term operating cost, but it also tackled the growing issue of traffic congestion, marking a strategic move towards a more efficient and cost-effective transit solution for Calgary. The present C-Day train had its roots in a 1975 plan envisioning a single line from downtown, which is the 8th Street station, to Anderson Road. City Council approved the plan in May 1977, kickstarting the construction of the South Line 1 month later. Originally intended to extend northwest, political pressure led to the addition of the Northeast Line, connecting Whitehorn Station to the downtown core with a shared downtown terminal station at 10th Street Southwest, and this joint terminal opened on April 27, 1985. For those familiar with my video on Calgary's city history, you'll recall that the city hosted the Olympics, triggering significant infrastructure investment, including the LRT system. The Northwest Line, an extension of the South Line to the city's northwest, opened on September 17, 1987. It stretched from the downtown core to University Station near the University of Calgary campus. Since then, all three lines have seen incremental extensions, with a majority of the stations commissioned and built in the 2000s. The C train's evolution mirrored the city's commitment to enhancing its transit infrastructure over the years. Now, despite experiencing a lower investment and growth towards the end of the 2000s, Calgary's transit landscape saw a resurgence in 2012 with the opening of the West Line, which was the first line opened in 25 years. This marked a significant stride in expanding the city's LRT network. Yet, the popularity of the system isn't solely attributed to its extensive coverage. Let's shift our focus to ticket pricing. Here's the catch. Rides within downtown are completely free, and this creates a unique incentive for commuter. The rest of the network does operate under a proof of payment system with adult fares at around $370. And while this may seem steep, it's relatively reasonable compared to other cities. The game changer, however, lies in the downtown free fares. Picture this, paying for a single ticket grants access to downtown travel, allowing individuals to reach work or specific appointments without the need for multiple tickets. It's a clever and commuter-friendly approach that contributes to the C train's popularity among Calgarians. In 2015, Calgary's C train became the busiest LRT system in North America for the first quarter of the year. And to handle this high demand, the rolling stock was upgraded to 4-car trains, meaning they could carry 800 passengers per trip compared to the 600 they could previously. At the time, the system had 300,000 daily users, making up around 22% of the metro's population. Looking ahead, Calgary is well prepared with a 30-year transit roadmap published in 2011. The highlight is the construction of the Green Line, connecting the red and blue lines at downtown. It will be Calgary's largest infrastructure project ever, costing $4.6 billion. It's also expected to be completed by 2027. And this ambition line promises to further enhance the city's transit capabilities. The C train is a shining example of tailoring transportation to meet a city's specific needs. The upcoming Green Line reflects Calgary's commitment to advancing its transit system. If you've enjoyed this journey through Calgary's transit history, don't forget to like and subscribe. And Alberta has the highest GDP per capita in Canada. At $73,000, it's even one of the highest if you consider the whole of North America. Being Canada's main oil producer, it's not surprising to know that Alberta's economy, while full of money, has experienced multiple boom and bust cycles. What's more interesting, though, is that we can see these boom and bust cycles replicated within the province's urban regional planning. Not sure you understand? Make sure you watch till the end of the video. And if you enjoy, subscribe and like, and let's get into Alberta's boom and bust urban planning. Regional planning is like a roadmap for the future, a vision born from optimism and shaped by the changing tides of economic prosperity. In times of optimism, regional planners dream big, envisioning what can be achieved in the years to come. They set out the steps to turn these dreams into reality, creating a roadmap for progress and development.
For 3 decades, oil companies had been drilling with only limited success. Searching. Then in February 1947, 20 miles south of Edmonton, near the little town of Leduc, Alberta, Imperial Leduc No. 1 struck oil.
Alberta's early days were centered around wheat and butter, but as the population grew and the economy expanded, so did the need for evolved land use planning. Economic swings from periods of prosperity to times of challenge have influenced the emphasis on comprehensive long-term planning. During prosperous times, the focus is on ambitious projects and expansive growth. However, in times of difficulty, priorities shift to meeting immediate needs. Land use planning is deeply rooted in the relationship between humans and the land, a connection that spans thousands of years in Alberta's rich history. Indigenous peoples have inhabited the western regions of Alberta near the Rocky Mountains for millennia. In fact, it's estimated the first people of Canada have inhabited Alberta for 10,000 years. In the 1700s, though, European exploration and the fur trade expanded into the Alberta area, marking a pivotal point in the region's history. The first settlements like Fort Vermilion were established in 1788, laying the groundwork for future development and land use. Formal land use planning in Alberta traces back to city bylaws established around the time of the province's inception. Calgary, which was founded in 1875 and officially incorporated as a city in 1894, initiated development restrictions as early as 1904. Following suit, Edmonton, founded in 1795 and incorporated as a city in 1904, implemented similar measures in 1906. You see, on September 1st, 1904, Alberta achieved provincial status alongside Saskatchewan. This milestone came a decade after the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway, with a population estimated between 160,000 to 200,000. Noted political historian Ernest Watkins estimated that Alberta began its existence with some 184,000 inhabitants. Financially, the province garnered just over $2 million in revenues during its inaugural year, with a significant portion stemming from federal subsidies. Key revenue sources within the provinces include fees on land transfers, which total $175,000, and proceeds from the sale of butter, amounting to $131,156. This just shows how Alberta's early European history was tough. Low revenue mainly focused on agriculture and butter. The Canadian Pacific Railway, though, which connected the west to the east, would become much more important in the settlement of the province. You see, in the early 1900s, a surge of settlers from rural areas flooded into urban centers, causing the value of land within cities to skyrocket. Within just 2 decades, urban land values increased nearly 20 times, reflecting the rapid growth and expansion of cities. Subdivisions proliferated within and beyond municipal boundaries, transforming the landscape of Alberta. At the provincial level, the Municipal Affairs Department was established in 1911, and the goal was to oversee the growing urbanization. By that time, Alberta boasted 6 cities and 136 towns and villages, highlighting the rapid urban development occurring across the province. To manage the subdividing of land and ensure efficient use of space, regulations were enacted through the Town Planning Act in 1913. This utilitarian measure empowered municipalities to control subdivisions, allocate space for transportation corridors, utilities, and public spaces, and ultimately managed land in the best interest of the public. The Town Planning Act marked a significant step towards organized urban development and sustainable land use practices in Alberta. The Town Planning and Preservation of Natural Beauty Act came in 1928, and it marked a significant milestone in land use planning, driven by public concerns. And you might be wondering, what were the public concerns about? Well, they were about the impact of billboards on rural landscapes. You see, the United Farmers Women of Alberta voiced their worries, highlighting the need to preserve the natural beauty of the countryside amidst rapid development. This act empowered municipalities to declare how land is used throughout zoning regulations, including specifications on building height, size, and type. An updated Town Planning Act in 1929 further enhanced municipalities' authority to manage land use, aligning with the common goals and values of Albertans. But by 1929, you probably know what's coming next. Alberta got hit with the Great Depression, and by 1938, Alberta faced significant economic challenges, with thousands of farms abandoned and provincial revenue declining. The Canadian prairies saw 2/3 of the population relying on governmental relief, leading to a migration from rural areas into cities or out of the province entirely. Public concerns shifted away from optimistic visions of the future as regional planning took a backseat in the provincial's policy. Municipalities prioritized preserving existing buildings rather than focus on new and fancy developments. Relief finally arrived, though, in 1939 with the onset of World War II, bringing growth in manufacturing, production, and agriculture to support the war effort. This period of prosperity spurred development again, And we could see this as the first boom and bust in Alberta's planning history. But this boom would be considered tiny compared to what's coming next. You see, the discovery of oil on Mike Tutra's farmstead near Leduc in 1947 marked a pivotal moment in Alberta's history. Drilling tests by Imperial Oil led to the official discovery of oil on February 3, 1947, with the commencement of production at Leduc No. 1 on February 13th, heralding the birth of Alberta's oil industry. The oil boom fueled a rapid expansion of Alberta's population, surpassing the national growth rate. By 1971, the population soared to 1.63 million people, reflecting the economic and demographic impact of the oil industry. The growth pressures faced by Edmonton and Calgary prompted proactive measures. In 1949 and 1951, Edmonton and Calgary respectively hired professional planners to address urban development challenges. The Town and Rural Planning Act of 1950 further empowered municipalities, granting increased authority and establishing district planning commissions to manage growth and development effectively. The 1960s and 1970s witnessed sustained growth in Alberta's economy, mirroring the rapid increase in population. As development surged, incremental changes were made to land use planning processes and governing bodies, leading to the culmination of the 1977 Planning Act. And the 1977 Planning Act reflected contemporary regional planning goals, emphasizing thoughtful development with input from municipalities and the public, aiming to minimize delays and administrative burdens. Notably, this act established a hierarchy of planning documents, placing regional plannings at the apex of the planning framework. Under the 1977 Act, municipalities were mandated to appoint representatives to planning commissions tasked with overseeing the development of regional plans. The provincial government retained authority to approve these plans and played a key role in resolving disputes between municipalities, some of which persisted for decades. And I'm looking at you, Calgary. However, this growth in the economy would once again take a turn with the 1970s and 1980s oil crisis. As global oil crisis in the 1960s and 70s drove the prices of oil skyward, Alberta's economy benefited. But after unprecedented growth came, of course, a bust. Alberta was the Canadian epicenter for the worldwide recession. In just 2 years, unemployment in the province more than doubled, rising from 9% to 10%. And there wasn't relief until the late 1980s when oil prices took a turn. The economic challenges of the 1980s rippled throughout the province, including to planning departments. Municipal contributions to planning commissions were cut, and in some cases completely. The provincial contribution to the planning fund was reduced to just half in 1994, when in the 1970s it was over 80%. This era represented two challenges to regional planning: development, which promotes economic recovery, and the extensive planning, which requires funding. That is, taxes. As Alberta's economy switched from boom to bust in the late 1980s and 1990s, enthusiasm for regional planning did not follow suit just as quickly. Amidst these conflicts and challenges, the landscape of regional planning in Alberta underwent a significant transformation. In 1995, the Municipal Government Act replaced the Planning Act of 1977, ushering a new era where mandatory regional planning was no longer in force. With the cessation of funding for planning commissions and the introduction of individual municipal responsibilities, Alberta's planning commissions, which had once represented a cooperative approach to regional planning, were disbanded. The strained relations between municipalities exemplified by conflicts like the one between the city of Calgary and Rocky View County, and this only contributed to the government's decision to reduce funding for regional planning. Transitioning from the disbandment of planning commissions, the new millennium brought another period of prosperity for Alberta. The pressures from rapid development, population growth, and the need for conservation prompted the provincial government to rethink its approach to managing land and resources. In response, the government at the time launched a comprehensive initiative in 2006 to gather input from stakeholder groups and the public. The goal was to identify potential outcomes and challenges for a proposed land use framework. This cross-ministry effort culminated in the release of a draft land use framework in May of 2008. Ted Morin, the Sustainable Resource Development Minister at the time, emphasized the importance of this framework in balancing environmental, social, and economic needs while providing certainty for decision makers. Following additional public consultations, the final land use framework was unveiled later of that year. And this set the stage for regional planning initiatives such as the Lower Athabasca Regional Advisory Council and the South Saskatchewan Regional Regional Advisory Council. The enactment of the Alberta Land Stewardship Act in October 2009 further solidified the legal foundation for regional planning and coordination decision-making processes. Since 2008, Alberta's planning has kept with most of North America. It's important to note, though, that home prices have skyrocketed like most homes in Canada. And from what I've seen on governmental websites, even municipal websites, it seems most of zoning regulations come from this 2001-2008 review, which might also explain why, since pretty much the crisis of 2008, everything has been on a rise. And now this isn't just because of land use policy, but many other internal and external factors which can't all be explained. But if you've enjoyed this video and learned anything new, it would mean the world to me if you could let me know by subscribing and liking this video. Let me know what else you'd like to see in the comments down below, and I'll see you on the next one. The cliche goes that if you visited one rural town, you visited one rural town. No two towns are alike in their merits or defects. However, a visit to a few villages in Canada these days, population of 10,000 or less, located far from our bustling urban centers, reveals that the challenges are mounting, and fast. The escalating opioid problem in Canada is wreaking havoc on rural areas, probably more so than in cities with emergency services and addiction treatment. Farmers are concerned about rural property crime, and a young Indigenous population is unable to find work, prompting them and other young people to leave town in search of better career possibilities and higher wages. According to a 2015 research from Strengthening Rural Canada, a government-supported effort to explore human capital in smaller communities, found that wages in rural Canada are around 30% lower than in urban areas. Owning a car is unavoidable if you live in the country. There's no public transit available. Your nearest grocery store could be up to 45 minutes away, and getting delivery is difficult if not impossible. Huge companies like Amazon may deliver, but prime next day shipping is just not possible, and delivery will most likely take a week or longer. Medical assistance could be an hour away via aircraft. And is there a fire on your property? Well, you should be prepared to put it out yourself, because it could take more than half an hour before the one person in a fire truck arrives. Require police, it might be 90 to 120 minutes. Power outage due to a storm, rural clients are last on the list. And while rural Canada is roughly 1/5 to 1/4 of the Canadian population, it's dispersed across 95% of the country's area. There is tremendous variability across rural communities, both demographically and economically. Rural communities in Atlantic Canada are quickly aging, but rural population in Canada's north are comparatively young, owing in part to high Inuit birth rates. And because of the seasonality of their industry, rural Atlantic Canada has higher unemployment rates than the rest of the country. You see, rural Canada is not a single category. Each town is unique, usually relying on one or two economic sectors. However, Canada is vast, and its topography and climate can vary greatly, affecting each one of these communities a little differently. You see, this is Kamsack in Saskatchewan. Kamsack has a population of 1,779 in the 2021 census of population, living in 792 of its 903 total private homes, which is a decrease of 6.3% compared to its 2016 population. The Canadian National Railway and the Kamsack Railway Station were established in 1903, thereby forcing the birth of Kamsack. Via Rail passenger service continue to serve the town today, but this small rural town is going through a crisis that has started to destroy rural Canada. Picture this, it's 10 a.m. on a summer weekday in Kamsack, Saskatchewan, and foot traffic on 3rd Avenue is beginning to increase. They're not here to shop, but to wait for the drugstore to open. A notice in the window apologizes, stating that the doors will be unlocked 30 minutes later than the normal today. They'll have to wait in line a little longer to receive their methadone. Kamsack is known among locals as slamsack. Slamming is a slang for drug injection. Locals says that the region's opioid issue began around 2012, shortly after members of the adjacent Coton First Nation settled a land claim with the federal government. "We got a payout and each got $20,000, says Ian Muska, a 32-year-old who is waiting for methadone to treat his addiction. An Aboriginal People's Television Network investigation showed that an area doctor